Thank you so much for being here, Erica. I'm so excited to have you. Thanks for making time for us, especially I hear that you've had a little accident, so we really appreciate you making the effort.
Well, it's nice to have this beautiful distraction, so I appreciate it.
Oh, good. I'm really excited. I had mentioned to you kind of off air for a minute before that I had sent a newsletter out. And I usually do that like either the week or early in the week of the interview, and then
Mhm.
again in the morning. And some things about this month's interview have not been the norm. And one of them is that I think I got to about page 7 of your book, No Two Persons, and I started to get so excited about the writing, Erica, that I wanted to write you something, and then I thought, oh no, that's just creepy. Yeah. So you can't do that. So then I read 2 more pages, and on page 9, everyone, I was like, forget it. Creepy or not, I'm doing this. And I sent Erica this email saying, Erica, you have to expect this fangirl interview because I had gotten so excited about it. And in the meantime, Lisa Mansfield, my partner in crime, had said, "Oh, I actually this month I can't come. I have a conflict." And then she started reading your book, and she told me she finished the first chapter and she rearranged her schedule so she could be here. So
Thank
I
you, Lisa.
so we're really excited, and we want to thank Lori, who said that she's going to be here tonight. So she's somewhere in the little boxes.
I
Thank you,
saw her
Lori.
check in. Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Lori, for introducing me to Erica, and I'm really looking forward to this chat. And I think that, so you have written 6 books. For those, I always assume that the people in the room don't know everything or haven't read everything. Um, for you, I think it's interesting to know that this is a group of writers. So slightly different from speaking to readers because
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have different things we want to ask. And I have all these questions for you. I'm very interested, of course, in your process. Um, I'm very interested in your particular path. And then I really do want to get down into the craft because there was a lot here that excited me, both as a writer myself, but also as a writing instructor. And so I'm hoping that I can lead a conversation that will kind of kick up lots and lots of interesting and inspiring and educational tidbits for everyone in this room. And then I'm going to turn it over so they can ask their own questions.
Perfect.
Let's start, because you've published 6 books. Let's start with how let's go back to the moment when you were much more like one of us. and,
It wasn't
and
all that long ago.
and aspirational, and you hadn't published anything yet. And okay, so now we're back at that moment. Had you been writing a long time already? Were you newly inspired? Did you kind of come to this? How did you kind of get started in the moment before you became a published author?
Well, it was a lot more than a moment. It was 15 years. So I started writing probably, mm, I was probably just about 30 when I started seriously trying to get creative work written. I was getting a PhD, so I was doing academic work, but this idea of publishing something that was more from my heart, from my soul, rather than just my brain. I read a Maya Angelou poem, and for some reason, I just thought, I'm writing this dissertation that 3 people will read, and I would really like to write something that speaks to broader, more human issues than what I was studying. So I started writing memoirs because I didn't know what else to do. I did not know how to create fiction. I really didn't. I had no idea of how to create a character based on someone I didn't know. I tried that a couple times. They were all sort of like based on my sisters and didn't work. So, so I wrote 3 different memoirs. I wrote about being a young mother, and publishers said, moms don't read. This dates me. Moms don't read, and you need more perspective. And then I wrote about living in Italy right after Under the Tuscan Sun came out, and they all said, everybody's writing about Italy, so forget that. And then I wrote the first version of House Lessons in 2001, and they said, you need more perspective. So I was kind of stuck. And I honestly, at that point, I was telling people I was a writer. I was being a hack writer. I was writing for content, just so that I could call myself that. But I was making no money at it. And I had just renovated this whole house and I was thinking about doing real estate because what the heck? And I just decided to flip the equation and do the real estate for money and write for free and write what I wanted. And the other thing was, I had heard this life coach on NPR, and the life coach said, what you have to do is think about the things in your life that bring you, he didn't say joy, but the equivalent now would be joy. What are the things you want to have fulfilled in your life? Those don't have to be the things that make you money, but you need to make sure that they're fulfilled in one way or another. And so I had writing, I had houses, I had cooking, which I loved, and I had my kids. And I thought, well, I could go back to chef school, but that's terrible hours. It's awful for a family. So I came around to real estate and I thought, fine, I'm going to do real estate. I'm going to write for myself, but I'm going to take a cooking class. And I took the cooking class. We killed crabs with our bare hands. And it was the weirdest thing I'd ever done. And it was so intimate and so visceral. And I just thought, well, this is really impacting me. What would it be like if you put 8 people together in a cooking school, kept them together? My class was a one-off, but what if you kept them together? And I think that the switch that happened was I went from nonfiction to fiction. And I went from when I was writing memoirs, I felt like I needed to have the answers to things. I needed to be an authority, right? I was telling people my great lessons I had learned. And, I had come from a very Germanic, we have answers kind of family. But for the first time, I had a question. And I didn't know who these people were. And I just weirdly believed they would show up. And they did. They just started showing up. I didn't know who any of them were. And I was in my mid 40s. And I just thought, what the heck is this, premenopause? I have no idea. But, something was happening. And that became School of Essential Ingredients. And after 15 years of, 100, 150 rejections per manuscript, that book sold in 12 hours. It was incredible.
Okay,
Just incredible.
let's slow down that 12 hours.
That
So,
part.
so you had so did you already have an agent though? The 150 rejections from before, did your agent stick with you despite that? And also a genre jump to fiction from memoir.
Right. And I kind of, in a weird way, lucked out that the agent, and God bless her, boy, she tried hard for me. I mean, she'd originally sold an academic book, the 2 readers' guides that we did. She'd originally sold those. And she really tried to get those memoirs sold, but they just weren't selling. And then she retired at the same time that I started writing fiction. And what happened was I went to dinner with a friend. She was entertaining an author from out of town. And she said, I'm an introvert. I don't like doing that. Can you please come with me? And I'm like, I'm an introvert. I don't do that. No. Okay, fine. So I went. My friend pitched my book to this woman, and she said, oh, I know exactly who she should send it to. Let me know as soon as you're ready. I said, do you want to read it? And she said, no, no, I believe in you. That's fine. And she helped get me in to that agency. Now, the agent that she sent it to didn't take it. But by the time he read it, his assistant had read it and fallen in love with it. And so he said to me, do you mind if I offer it to another agent in my company? And I said, sure. I mean, of course. And so that's how I ended up with Amy Burkauer at Writer's House. I mean, it was just a very kismet thing. And then they called, and her assistant called and said, okay, Amy wants to talk to you, but she can't talk to you for 2 weeks. So I spent 2 weeks certain that Amy was going to call me and tell me how awful my book was. I mean, I was certain that was what was going to happen. And my husband keeps saying, she's a busy woman. She's not going to take the time to call
I
you,
was gonna
tell you
ask
how
you.
awful your book is. And so she calls, and the house cleaners show up and they're vacuuming in the other room. I'm literally in a closet trying to find a soundproof thing. And she says she loves my book. She wants to represent it. Um, she can't really talk right now because Ken Follett's about to go on Oprah and she has to go be with him. I'm like, okay. And she sold it we had an offer within 12 hours. It was when she put it out there. It was astonishing. It was like winning American Idol. I'm telling you, it was so, after all that time,
Mhm, mhm.
have it go that, I mean, it wasn't smooth. It took 4 months before I actually ever talked to Amy from the time I submitted to that. But once it was in her hands, it went really fast.
So it sounds like you submitted, you had 4 months like sitting, on the edge of a knife.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then though she didn't ask for any changes. She just said, "I love it. I'm going to send it out." And then
Yeah,
within
very
3 days,
few.
it's
Yeah,
done.
just a couple changes, not a lot. I mean, she probably
Uh-huh.
should have changed more, honestly, but she's not an editing agent. She's a negotiating agent. That's where her strong suit is.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So,
So
so
so then okay, so what did that feel like? You you were saying that it was super exciting. Did you actually feel so I recently sold a novel and I get asked all the time, and the people in this room who know that they were the ones doing the asking all keep saying to me, "Oh, this is going to change your life." Did it feel to you like it was going to change your life?
yes, it did.
Yeah.
It did because it was a big offer. This was back in 2007 when you could still get a pretty good offer. And it was for two books,
Mm-hmm.
not one book, which they don't do very much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it did feel like it because it wasn't just one, it was two. And even though that terrified me because I had no idea what book two would be,
Right.
um, still it was what I'd wanted for all my life and seriously tried hard for 15 years. I mean, that was
Right.
it pretty much, I mean, American Idol was a big thing back then, and that's just what it felt like. It
Right.
just
And
felt,
in your case, it had kind of changed a dream of being a writer into the reality of, yes, I am now a writer, I'm a novelist, and I have a 2 book deal, so I'm not even going to be a 1 book wonder. There's going to be
yeah,
a
yeah,
second.
yeah. Except then the Kirkus review comes out for School of Essential Ingredients. They panned it. They eviscerated it.
Oh,
It
they
was,
did?
oh my God. It was,
Naughty.
I look it up just for giggles. I mean, it is one of the most obliterating reviews I've ever seen. And I'm calling my agent saying, we got to pull it back. This thing can't come out. And then the next week, Publishers Week, they loved it as much, and then it went on to sell quite well. So it was all fine. And now I take a bad Kirkus review as a badge of honor. And it's why there's that fake cultist review in No Two Persons. That was my little private joke with Kirkus. They didn't get, by the way. So that's fine.
Even better.
Yeah, even better.
Okay, so now you have your big book deal, and who was your editor?
So at that point, it was Rachel Kahn, who's now at HarperCollins.
Uh-huh.
Um, and she was at Putnam, and so was Putnam, and then Berkeley for the paperbacks.
And did Rachel, when you say at that time, did Rachel actually stay on the book like for the whole duration? Did-
She did. She was there for both School of Essential Ingredients and Joy for Beginners, and then she left partway through Lost Art of Mixing, and I switched. I got a new editor,
Uh-huh.
um, and then I left after Lost Art of Mixing, and moved over to St. Martin's.
Okay. I know that you teach. Obviously, Lori encountered you at WOTS. Had you started teaching then? Like,
Well,
how?
I taught it because I got my whole PhD. So I taught at the University of Washington. I taught at Antioch. I was teaching at some conferences. So I've kind of been teaching all along. But originally, I wasn't teaching creative writing because I didn't get a creative writing degree. I got a degree in literature, and I'd never even taken a creative writing course. So
Hmm.
I until I didn't feel confident teaching those classes for some time. But I love it now. I teach workshops. So.
Hmm. I was gonna ask you, because to me, I think that it kind of informs the the relationships with editors like informs like the
Mhm.
way you teach and vice versa. You know what I mean? It kind of puts you into that much more analytical brain. So I was wondering whether you had actually started teaching before you started working with Rachel. So you hadn't. Tell us how tell us, because many of us in this room have never worked with an editor before. So tell us like what that was like for you. Did you get the famous um, you know, all right, we love this book. We're going to make you this big offer. We're going to buy it. And then here's like the long list of things we want you to change.
I didn't, I get it now, weirdly, more now than I did then. Um, so I've had Rachel was a very light editor. She would barely touch my work. But now and I really appreciate feedback. I went to graduate school during the time when writing groups were really first being created. This also dates me, but I have always been in a writing group. I believe in feedback. I believe in getting a good writing group because they are my safety net. I don't want a work going out without other eyes on it. And I know that other authors, they're very different. And I'm the first person to say everybody writes differently. And the beauty of being a writer is you get to figure out what works for you. Um, but in my case, feedback really helps. And so, as I said, my agent is not really an editor. So, what she has done is she's hired an in-house editor that any of her clients can work with. And Jen is astonishing. And she and I are now on the fourth pass of the book that I'm writing now. And I just got 11 single-spaced pages of edits. So, you don't, and I learned so much from that.
Hmm.
Um, and I also had an extraordinary editor at Sasquatch when I wrote House Lessons. She's incredible. And in fact, if there are any nonfiction writers out there or memoir writers out there who want to work with a development on editor, just contact me. I can pass you along to her because she's really, really talented. And I learned so much. I mean, I really I I love working with a good editor. And a good editor to me is someone who sees your story. They're interested in getting your story, not their story.
Hmm.
And that's rare.
Hmm.
And also, instead of giving you solutions, tells you the problem. Like,
Right.
I need more emotion. I need more character. I need, um, and and I think that's really helpful because I can figure out my own solution, what fits my book.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
if I can hear what's missing for you, I
Right.
can.
Right. So I'm going to ask you then about your two book deal because, it's not necessarily a good thing. Like some
Hmm.
some
Hmm.
authors live to regret having them. Um, did you were in a position where you didn't even know what the second book was going to be?
Yeah.
What kind of timeline did they give you for it?
18 months.
And
They really wanted a year. And I said, six. It took me six. Really, that's not going to happen. So, yeah.
so how did the 6 years to 18 months go? Like how did that happen?
Well, the 6 years, I had two teenagers, a full-time job, and it just I would fit it into the nooks and crannies. Once I got Joy for Beginners, I'd actually quit real estate in December of 2007. Real estate had gotten that was right before the crash. Real estate had gotten very weird, morally ambiguous. I couldn't take it, so I left, just believing School of Essential Ingredients would sell. I didn't have an agent yet. I just took a leap, and luckily, a net appeared. Um, so I and then the other thing that happened is the house that I'm in that I wrote about in House Lessons, which we had renovated. It's in Port Townsend. We were living in Seattle. We had renters, but they moved out. And I said to my husband, can we have the house for a year? So I came out here. There was nothing in this house. It was white walls, a folding table, a writing chair. That was it. I mean, just nothing. And it was this blank space, no internet, no nothing. And I would come out 3 days a week, sleep on a futon on the floor, and I just wrote my brains out. And it was great. It was a marvelous experience. So that part was fun. But it's one of the things that I think people have to come to grips with is, you can have a first book and it can be successful. I mean, School of Essential Ingredients was successful. And then what happened was they just threw Joy for Beginners just out in the world, like, oh, it'll be fine. They gave it no support and it didn't sell nearly as well. And so then your sales are your fault. They never claim responsibility for the sales.
Mhm.
And so then, it isn't as if once you sell your first book, you're fine. Scent Keeper, which was my fourth novel, almost didn't sell. Like we came that close to never finding an home for that. And that's the one Reese Witherspoon chose for her book club. So, you just it is a crapshoot and there's no guarantee. and you just have to keep, you have to do it because you love it and you got to keep going.
Okay,
So,
I want to come back to Reese's book club.
sure.
Before we, before we,
Who
everybody
doesn't,
else in the
really?
room goes,
Who doesn't?
"What about Reese's book club?" But before we do that, so you had this is interesting because I don't think a lot of people know about this, but the idea that that just because you get a first book and just because that first book is a strong book or does well or wins awards or whatever, doesn't mean that you're home and hosed for the rest of your career. It's always like the next book has to make it.
Yeah.
So knowing what you know now, is there anything that you could have done to support that second book if you had known that not to rely on your publisher, quite so
I
much?
mean, I was lucky to fall in with a group of very media savvy people. I mean, there really wasn't social media. This was 2011. I mean, I think there was Facebook, I mean, there wasn't a lot. But I did everything I could. I did my own. They sent me on a small book tour. I then did a secondary one all on my own. Really hit the bookstores. And the independent bookstores are why I'm still writing. I mean, they took me in and um, they hand sold my books. And that is really why I'm still writing.
Mhm.
Um, so there are those things that you can do, but it, so much of it is luck. I mean, I think now you can make yourself a social presence, you can do all those things. Um, uh, the amount of time I have to spend doing that is always taking away from the writing. And so you have to decide, where the equation lies for you, I
Right.
think.
So did then you did they have an option on the third book too?
Yeah. So what generally happens is you get a contract and then your publisher will get first right of refusal on the next book. And so then, and that's something you can get out of if you need to, generally, if you have a good agent. But it's rare to get a contract where they don't say we get first look.
Hmm.
uh, because they are to a certain extent more or less investing in you by publishing your book, and they want to be able to, if it does well, they want to be able to guarantee they can get the next one if they want it.
Right. And then but with the drop in sales with the second book, did they publish the third or did they say no, you
They
can
did.
take it
They
ourselves?
did. They did. And then the next book after that was House Lessons, and they did not want that one. And
Hmm.
so, and by that point, I was frustrated by the lack of support that I was getting, and so I wanted to switch. And
Right.
so I jumped. That jump didn't go as well. That's when I switched to Scent Keeper, and that one barely sold. And like for 5% of what I had gotten for School of Essential Ingredients. I mean, that's how much it can vary.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so um,
So,
it's crazy. I mean, I would love to tell everybody out there that it happens once and then you're golden. And but if you look at even somebody like Kristen Hanna, who was doing one form for a long time, it was when she switched genres that she really took off.
mhm.
And so, we constantly reinvent ourselves. We constantly come up with good books. And I think the main thing is um, when I teach classes and students say, should I be a writer? And my response is always, can you not? Because if you cannot, go find something else to do because your chance of really succeeding at this it's a crapshoot, like I said. But if you can't not, then you're going to do it anyway. I mean, I'm going to do it anyway, right?
Right. Right.
It makes me happier than anything in the world. People say, "Are you going to retire?" It's like, why the heck would I retire? That's crazy. I want to do this forever. So, yeah.
So when you say success, did your definition of success like start to shift? Like, is it still the same thing as it was when you started?
I have a couple definitions for success. On a financial level, my definition is I make enough on the book to write the next one. That's all I
Ah,
really think about. I don't need to get a big house and a pool. I just want to be able to write the next book. And so if I can get a big enough advance to do that, um, then that's great. But it's interesting. I get these letters from people, and I think that's the astonishing thing about being published is strangers write you. And if you've read No Two Persons, this story will make sense. I had a woman write me and say, it's hard for me, it's always hard for me to tell this one, but she said, my mom died 5 years ago. She had a massive stroke. She couldn't speak. And she grabbed my hand and she looked me in the eye and she was communicating with me. And I believed what she said was, let me go. But she never could talk. I couldn't hear her say it. And she said, I have felt guilty for 5 years. And she said, I just read the last chapter of No Two Persons. And she said, it's the first time I haven't felt guilty in 5 years. And it's like, okay, I'm done. What else do you need? Like when there are those moments of connection or somebody saying that, that something I wrote helped them through grief or helped them through being a teenager or whatever it is, it's just that magic of putting words on paper, putting your thoughts on paper. And they're not going to be interpreted exactly the way you meant them. That's fine. That's why I wrote No Two Persons, because I know we all interpret it differently. But the fact that something I wrote could speak to somebody else, that's magic. That's worth doing.
Yeah, right. I know. Um I wrote a children's book that came out a long time ago now, but I didn't think it was that long because I was teaching at a college, and this young lady came up to me, this undergrad, and she said, "Yeah, do you mind signing my copy of Ruby's Wish? I'm the first one in my family to go to college, and this was the book my parents, listen to this, read to me." So how young was she? Read to me. Yeah. And half my brain, I had a split brain moment where half my brain was going, "Oh my God, I'm so touched. Like I've influenced this young woman to go to college." And the other part of my brain was going, "No, you can't be that old." Yeah. Let's rewind a little bit to Reese Witherspoon. We don't want to leave her there out there untouched because talking about success and what does success mean, uh, uh, every time I teach pretty much I ask at the beginning of the course for my writers to come up with, I call it a Dear Steve-O letter. Actually stole it, I borrowed it from Annie Lamott, and which is just a casual letter to your favorite brother, telling them what you're up to, what kind of book it is, but more importantly, what your hopes and dreams are for the book. And it's
Mhm.
always interested me in all these years how different, what you really want from a book as a writer is. I had come into it assuming everybody wants what I want. I write for affirmation. I know that about myself. But I think one of the more popular um uh goals is that they want to reach many people. They want their story to be heard by many people,
Mhm.
and they want uh, It might not necessarily be the prestige of being on the New York Times bestseller list, which I know you've been, but it's just that idea that you can go out there and everyone's hearing your story. So
Mhm.
you can't get much bigger than Reese's Book Club for
It does help. It does help.
So how was that? And did that feel yet again as if you had won the Amazing Race or whatever it was?
It does. And I mean, because the thing is, it's a very weird, my situation was completely unusual. So I get a call from I get a text from my agent saying, your editor and I want to talk to you at the same time. So we're going to do a group call. Well, I mean, it's like the only reason why they do that, I mean, I couldn't even figure out why they would do that other than to tell me I had cancer or something. I mean, there was just, or they were dropping me. I had no idea, but it just was because here's the thing. Sunkeeper had come out in May. It had died. It had sold maybe 2,000 copies. The publisher had dropped it. They were giving it absolutely no support. This was December, right? So the book
Mhm.
had been out for 8 months. Reese doesn't choose books by older women who have written 6 books. I mean, that's not her MO. Her MO is debut novelists, hardcover, and she chooses as they're coming out. She likes to make stars. My book had been out for 8 months and it was dead, you know, and she plucked it out of obscurity. I don't know. Everybody always asks how it happens. My understanding is she has a team of people that review the books because every publisher that has a woman author will send it to Reese. And she's got people that are screening. They know what she likes. They choose 10 books a month, and she reads all 10, and she chooses one. And so somehow, and my guess is that because there's some similarities between my book and Where the Crawdads Sing, and they knew how much she loved that book. My guess is that's how my book floated to the top, but I don't know. I never, she chose me for February of 2020. So talk about the best, coolest thing that ever happened to you being smacked down by the pandemic. I mean, ah, I had that happen in February 2020. House Lessons came out, so it came out in paperback. Scentkeeper came out in paperback. House Lessons was launched literally the week the nation shut down. So my entire double book tour out the window. And everybody's going, "Oh, well, can you just make a professional video that's 10 minutes long?" It's like, can I what? Nobody knew how to do that stuff back then, or at least not me. So it was an extraordinary phone call. And then you can't tell anybody for 3 months. I mean, I was allowed to tell my husband. That was
Hmm.
so you have to keep this amazing secret that all you want to do is tell the whole world. And then you can't. So
So your interview with her was over the phone?
I'd never even talked to her. She started doing those interviews after the pandemic started because that was a way to get people engaged on social media. So
Uh,
I really was one of the last ones in sort of the old school method that she did, where she would, do a picture of herself, she'd do a little blurb, but she wasn't as personally involved with them
mhm,
as she became
mhm.
later. So I never got to talk to her. No, bums me out. I have such respect for what she is doing. I mean, the career she has changed.
Right,
Um,
right.
just again, what she did for my sales allowed me to write for 2 years without worrying about it.
So
That's
you got to see that whole trajectory change, and
right, right. And so then my next book got a good advance. Now it will not have sold as well as Sunkeeper, so now I'm going to be back in the hole again, and they're going to be giving me a hard time on the next book. But you just keep going. You just keep going.
yeah. So y- that book is this book, no?
Yes, that book is this book.
Okay. I want to touch on how I kind of found you in the first place, which was because Laurie Skiba, one of our group, had taken a class from you at WOTS, and it was about using your senses when writing, I believe. I don't know exactly what the title was, but I think that was the topic. So when I came to your work, I was really interested. I actually kind of um, jumped to the conclusion that was going to be very, very heavy and present in your writing. You were teaching it. You had
Mhm.
a book that was about cooking. I'm like you. I love to cook. I run writers' retreats and I like cook for, 12 people every meal for 4 days. Um, and you had a book about scent. You had a book. So is that the way that you get into scene, into place, into time, into character, do you think?
Certainly for Scent Keeper, certainly for School of Essential Ingredients. I think to me, No Two Persons feels more cerebral.
Hmm.
I think that's has everything to do with the fact that I was writing it during COVID and we were locked down and there was no way to travel and encounter new scents and tastes and touches and smells. And it was, so my brain stimulation was occurring from these different research topics that I was getting interested in that would turn into characters. Um, so I'd be thinking, it would be sensual in that free diving is a very sensory experience. But I think a lot of those characters and a lot of those stories, when I look back at it, that book feels very interior in a
Hmm.
very mental, intellectual way. And I
Right.
think it has everything to do with it. I never say that it's a COVID book. It ends in December of 19 on purpose as a sort of a nod of the hat, a tip of the
Hmm.
hat. But I think it's actually one of my least sensual books that I've written.
Hmm. it was less central than I expected it to be because I
Yes.
kind of
And not a lot of
expected.
food, not a lot of food. I actually had to, on purpose, stick food in there because I knew people would be disappointed. So,
Um, but so that was interesting to me. I when I teach, if you teach about the senses, what I usually teach about is details. The
mm,
use of details and uninventable details. And in fact, the writers that I've personally mentored have formed a group, and we call ourselves the Uninventables because I'm always asking for uninventable details. And one of the reasons why I got so excited by page 7. I actually was, to tell you the truth, very excited on page 5, which is actually the way that they number books these days. Page 5 is actually page 1. So I got excited right from the first page because your use of detail I thought was just extraordinary. And all the way through the book, they were like just so deftly slid in there. Like they never drew attention to themselves, but they would be just whoppers, like absolute stunners. And so my favorite detail, which starts on the bottom of what should have been page 1 and just goes to the top of page 2, is is Alice, this character, getting under the table and noticing. I'm going to read this here. Um, so she's in a dark space beneath the tablecloth where she could watch her mother's fingers tighten along with the conversation, which I thought was beautiful, and then watch her older brother's shoes point toward the exit. I thought, wow.
mhm.
And you knew so much about that family in just those two observations. It was absolutely masterful. So,
Well, and those details came from about a month's worth of research into Paul Ekman's work on microexpressions and, reading books about how people lie and that whole idea of watch where people point their feet. That tells you everything you need to know. And I remember reading that and going, I will use that someday. And so it wasn't as if it was anything I had ever observed, but it was something that someone had taught me. And I
mhm,
thought, yeah, without having to say this is an abusive situation, I can just give you those two things, and that
right.
is all you need. So
It,
thank you for noticing. That's great.
it was I found it amazing. And but so you had mentioned that these characters came out of research that you were already doing. You weren't doing the research for this book. They just turned into characters so what were you researching and why? Why
Um,
were you reading about microaggressions?
um, I started reading about microaggressions when I was writing Scent Keeper. Because there's an abusive situation there too. I've
Mhm,
actually had people write me letters and say, "Everything okay in your childhood?" Because you sure write about this a lot. But so I have read a lot because one of the things I find interesting about a character who has had an abusive childhood is they are very, very observant. So if you want a character who is really noticing like how someone has their shoulders or whether their chin is tucked, they allow you to be specific in your details because they
mhm,
see things. If you're doing limited third person, they allow you to do that. So I've always been interested in that, and I'm deeply interested in the subliminal. So, and I think those microaggressions are very subliminal. So there's that. But the reality is, no, I was doing the research to find characters. So we're having a pandemic. I'm bored to tears. Um, and I am roaming the used bookstore with my mask on, looking for inspiration. And so Tyler, the free diver, was actually one of the first characters I wrote, and that's because I found that book, One Breath,
mhm.
and it was a gorgeous cover. I was just sucked in, and I started reading about free diving, and I just thought, why the hell would you ever want to do that? That makes, I mean, no, I can't even put my face in a sink of water and hold it. I would never, ever do that. But as a writer, that makes it fascinating. I really want to know what this person who is not at all like me, who wants things I do not want, what would that be like? Like, what would drive you to do that? I'm fascinated by that question. And so what I found is, particularly with this book, I do the research, and then at some point, there is something, there's some line or some fact that would spark the character. So for Tyler, it was the fact about how when you're free diving, the first 30 feet, you're fighting the hydrostatic pressure. And so you have to go against the water. But 30 feet down, it switches and the water starts pulling you. And if you want to come back up, you got to work really hard. And I just thought, that's it. And it was like the whole story just bloomed open. Tyler walked in and then he took over. And then all the facts that I had learned became a way of supporting his character. For Nola, the teenager, it was I had an interest in homeless teens. I had an interest in unhoused people because we had a pandemic and it was just burgeoning out there. And I wanted to know what that was like. Um, but I also was reading these amazing animal facts because I had this book of amazing animal facts, and I read this fact about how I think it's the common swift can fly for 6 months without ever touching the ground.
Hmm.
Read that line, and all of a sudden, the amazing animal facts and the homelessness came together and turned into a teenager, and that was Nola. And she just walked in, and it was her chapter. And from then on, she just took it. And that happened again and again. It's like, what would it be like to be stuck in a ghost town in a snowstorm? Boom, in walks, So in
At
walks.
what point, though, did all these characters with all their stories and your explorations of what it was like to be them, at what point did you say, or did you say it right from the beginning? Oh, these are all characters in one book. Do you see what I mean? Like,
Always knew. I
you
always knew.
always knew this was they were all in one.
I a couple times in my life with School of Essential Ingredients and with No Two Persons, the structure came first. So it was cooking school, 8 students, one teacher. This was one book, one author. Originally, there was no author. I mean, Alice didn't have a chapter, but I knew it was one book, 9 readers. I don't know why 9. I have no idea. It just this voice came in my head said one book, 9 readers. So it was just a matter of figuring out who fit.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and then I realized that I needed Alice because the first person who is changed by a book is the author.
Right.
So, and then this fascinating thing happened. Once I included her, I realized that now all my readers knew things that the other characters would not know. So when Laura is reading Alice's book and deciding whether or not she should pitch it to her boss,
Hmm.
we know what that will mean to Alice. Laura doesn't. And so, and when Nola is in that gardening shed and she's thinking about that thing that happens the before and after, which is this pivotal moment in the book Theo, we know what that meant to Alice. Nola doesn't know. And so
Right.
we become the first person to understand that there are connections here that those people will never see. We are the connector of all those people. And
Hmm.
if you look at the connections between them, and every character is connected to at least one other character in that book. My agent demanded that, and I'm glad she did.
Hmm.
Um, but every character is connected to at least one other character, but in almost no case do they know what we know. It's always,
Right.
we know that Sailor is Laura's twin, but Tyler doesn't know or care,
Right.
and even with Madeline and Nola at the end of the book, they get to know each other fairly well, but Madeline never knows what we know about Nola. So it's always this. And I think that's true about people in general. We cannot know, even our own parents, even our own siblings, we cannot know the
Hmm.
full extent of who that person is.
So when you sat down to write this book, you said the structure came first, but
Mhm,
when did the theme pop in? When did this, you know, you said 9 readers, one book,
mhm.
but did you know right from the beginning what you wanted to say using 9 readers in one book?
I
That
did. I did. That was January of 2020. We were siloing up pretty hard in this country. I mean, that it sounds almost laughable now, but it felt really bad then. Um, and I it kind of broke my heart. And the one place in the world that I felt like people were discussing differences of opinion in a way that was positive and productive and curious, not antagonistic, was book clubs. and they were talking about books, and particularly with Scent Keeper because there were some real differences of opinion about certain characters, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And so I wanted to write a book that celebrated differences of perception and opinion, and that showed that that was okay, you know.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's why we come to our our different conclusions, is because, like each of you that read this book, you opened that cover and the book you read was dependent on who and where you were in your life at that time. Which characters you responded to, which ones drove you crazy. That has everything to do with where you came from, far more than with what I wrote. What I write is just the springboard for your reactions.
Hmm.
Um, and and I'm fine with that. I got no problem with that.
And that actually is a thought that you trapped in this book itself, is
Hmm.
it not?
Yes.
I thought that one of you're talking about you read the book according to where you come from. I came to this book very much as a writer who at that point had just sold her novel.
Oh, that's a great time to read that book. Yeah.
Yeah. And who has like the most kick-ass agent ever. So, so reading who and my agent lives in New York. So I was going, I'm enjoying this agent chapter. It was really, really fun. But I also came to this book as an author and as a writing instructor. So I found it so interesting, like how you captured things specifically about writing, about the craft, or I don't know if craft is the right word, about the challenge of writing. And one of my favorite word was on page 74. Um, there's this moment when, oh, and I should say also that my novel is it's a braided narrative, three voices.
Oh.
So yeah, so on page 73, now you know who I am when I was reading. On page 73, um, we're we're in whose chapter are we in? Rowan's chapter. And
Hmm.
um it says the first livery book he'd been assigned, and he damn well didn't want them thinking he was asking for help. And two, as the author didn't know him and likely wouldn't care if she did, none of this was actually about him. This was about the author and her character, a character she obviously loved with all her soul, with every word at her disposal, a character whose pain she felt on a syntactical level, while still being able to stop the events that were still being unable to stop the events that were happening to him. And then this is the part that popped out to me, and the voice that wound them together, like two strands around a stick, over and around each other. How the hell do you turn that into sound? He wondered. And I thought, that's it exactly. I'm always talking to writers about voice, and voice is the ability to turn that into sound, but it's so hard to describe what voice is. You kind of just know it when you hear it, and why can one writer take something and it sounds completely pedestrian, and the other writer will do that and it's just full of voice, like you've just turned that moment into sound.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it has, I mean, there's sort of a natural sensibility. There's a willingness to take that leap into the voice. For me, um, I think one of the big switches when I moved from memoir to fiction was, um, I think before that, I was trying to prove something, maybe to my parents, who the heck knows. But, I wanted to bring home the good report card. I wanted to prove that I was smart. It was like, it was about me. It was about my ego. And once I got the idea for School of Essential Ingredients and these characters started showing up, it was about them. It was about their stories. And I was in service of their stories. Their stories were not in service of my ego or my success or anything. I am very much I am the servant of the story. And I have no problem with that. That's just great. Um, but I think that makes a big difference, is when you can really feel it when an author lets the story be in charge. And you can really hear it when the author is still saying, hey, this is actually about me. Not as a memoir, but just as a kind of a part of the voice. Like there's a separation when the author is still, when their ego is still more important than the story. And it's a lack of willingness to do whatever it takes. That one thing I loved about Rowan's story was that ability to talk about choice of words, and I can tell you the day that thesaurus.com went to AI, by the way, because I used to use thesaurus.com constantly. I would go in. I mean, I do this with every important word. I will go in and see what are my other options. Do they sound like? Not just meaning, like, okay, I'm looking for connotation, I'm looking for all that, but also is the sound, is the rhythm of the word going to fit that sentence? Will one of them fit better than another? And I did that for every important word in no two persons. You go into thesaurus.com right now, and I'm sorry, but AI doesn't know a synonym and I mean a similar or metaphor. I think that they're terrible. It is just, I haven't gotten a good word out of them in 4 months. So yeah, I mean, I loved that part, that ability to, because we're creating the voice through the vocabulary we use, through the rhythms we choose for our sentences, um, through the size of our paragraphs, through how much we use dialogue. All of those things are incredibly important.
Hmm.
And you just get better at that the more you do it.
I was going to ask you as my follow-up question, like how you actually teach voice when you sit down and teach your workshops, but I think that you gave us a little mini class just, just in the last few sentences. Thank you.
I do. I think part of it is just like people say, where do your metaphors come from? I'm kind of known for metaphors. There are way too many in School of Essential Ingredients, by the way. I'm just going to put that out there. Um, but to me, it is a matter of just opening up your mind and saying, okay, all things being equal, all things being possible, what could I compare these two, what could I compare this thing to that would make it interesting, that would have an emotional resonance? Not just a practical, this dinosaur is like a table, no, but how am I gonna make whatever my comparison is, reverberate?
Right,
Um, and that becomes more poetry than anything else.
right. And I also think that what we often forget um is that it gives you an insight to like into the protagonist's perspective, right? Like how they're thinking of things. So it's
Yes.
like that perception is one way to tell character, to show how
Right.
a character perceives.
Yes, and even if it's limited third, even if it's omniscient, that was one of the best writing tips I ever got from one of my writing group members, was that the metaphor has to match the situation or the person or the object that it is um, in contact with.
Mhm.
And that was that and learning how to end a chapter. Those two things that person taught me was like, all right, I'm forever in her debt.
Learning to end, not just a chapter, but how you end a paragraph, how you end a scene. Those
Yeah,
endings, like making them like, yeah.
yeah. Well, and there's an interesting story. I'll try to make this one quick, but it's when Sunkeeper came out in hardback, the reactions were not great to the ending. People really had a hard time with it. And we had chosen not to put in the epilogue.
Hmm.
Um, I don't, for whatever reason. And so I actually went back to my publisher and said, for the paperback, can we put in the epilogue? It needs another beat.
Hmm.
And she said, yeah, okay. I don't know why not. So actually, the book that Reese chose was not the book that came out with her stamp on it. I mean, it was a 2-page epilogue, but it was astonishing what a difference it made to people. And then it was when I was writing No Two Persons that I realized that Scent Keeper is my only novel thus far that follows one character. It is a traditional novel trajectory. It's a quest.
Hmm.
All of my other books are interconnected stories. And the ending of an interconnected story is light on the page. The point of the ending of an interconnected story is to make you and go back and rethink the other ones, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
They aren't, the ending of a traditional novel, you take all these pieces and you put them together and you land it like a Simone Biles vault, right? You just
Right.
and Scent Keeper had a interconnected story ending, but it was a traditional novel. It needed more of that landing. And so the epilogue helped. And I could tell you based on a Goodreads review which version they had read.
Oh,
Because,
wow.
and it was only 2 pages, but it made such a difference. So when I came to finish, when I was coming up with an ending for No Two Persons. It's like, we got to land this sucker, right? Because when you end interconnected stories, it's a similarly light ending, but it needs to vault you all the way back to the beginning and say, oh my God, now I got to rethink everything. The
Right.
number of people that write me and go, I had to read it 2 times. I read it 3 times. I read it 4 times. I went back to find the connections. Um, and that I got no trouble with using up people's time that way. So
I interestingly enough, as I got ready to read your book before I actually started, um I started kind of like asking other writers who I knew had read your book already what they thought. And the ending came up time and time again. I think that they generally, the ones that I've spoken to, believe that you really did stick the ending.
it's probably my favorite ending I've ever written. I love that ending when it all came together. And that was an interesting thing. It's so much fun to talk about these things with people who are writers because you all get things out of it that nobody else gets. But so I have to figure out the ending. I know that it has to have Alice. I know that she needs a new idea for a book. I don't know where that's going to come from. I don't know how. I also know that every character has to be connected to somebody else. And at that point, Miranda, the artist, was not connected to anybody. And so my agent, who has very commercial taste, she goes, well, Rowan lives on an island and Miranda lives on an island. What if they have an affair? I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. But and I just said, okay. And so I just let it sit. I've learned that, when I don't know where to go in a story or I've got two problems, oftentimes the two problems will solve each other. So if I just let them sit for a minute, and I literally sat up in bed at 5 in the morning and went, yes, it's the sculpture. That's it. I don't know. How does she see the sculpture? I'll figure that out. But I loved the idea that she doesn't know it's her book that makes the wings. So that it's this whole,
Right.
it comes full circle. And letting people know that without saying she couldn't read the words, not being too heavy-handed and yet letting you know. That was one of those tricky little, okay, let's find just exactly the right word for this
Yeah.
situation.
The right touch. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it was very, very enjoyable. And I need to like save some time for everyone and their questions, but I want to add, I want to end very self-indulgently on another paragraph of yours that I want to share with everyone. So at one time I used to work in advertising, and we had an art director there who was a great cartoonist, and he used to draw cartoons like, caricatures of all of us, and he had a very wicked sense of humor, so they were always slightly embarrassing, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Deprecating. Um, and the one that he drew of me was me sitting in front of like this big game board, like I was laying out a Monopoly set or something like that. Except that the game board, the game board read, "Punctuation is fun." So, so with that in mind, I came across this paragraph and I felt so vindicated. So thank you very much. Um, and the paragraph reads, in the evenings, he started working with the pens again. He picked out a new color, green, which he used to note punctuation. Commas, semicolons, em dashes. Highlighted, they became like notes in a musical score. The author as conductor, leading his voice, slowing it down, once, twice, speeding it up in a single sentence that ran like a glorious horse all the way to the bottom of a page. I just loved that. I was like, yes, yes, punctuation is absolutely critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
there are
like,
audiobook narrators that do highlight it as well.
right,
So,
yes.
um, but we also do something, we call it the comma hunt because I love to put in commas. And so one of the editorial passes on my work is always the comma hunt, and we just cut out as many as we can. And I still have plenty. There's no problem. There's plenty in there. But I think it's sort of my equivalent of saying because I write out loud, I edit out loud. And
Mhm.
so I think when I'm pausing to think, I just automatically drop in a comma, and so then we have to go in and just weed them all out.
Well, I just I just negotiated my contract, and in it there's like this little thing that carves out copywriting as copy editing
Mhm.
as it's like, the author will approve all changes except for copy editing. And I
Oh,
said to my agent, I was like, wait a minute. What do they mean by copy editing? Like, and she
yeah.
looked at me and she thought, because I've been in the industry for a long time, so I wasn't looking for a definition. So what was I looking for? And I said, well, I said copy editing could be like punctuation, right? But punctuation is very important to me as an author. And she said, so in which cases, would you object? And I said, I don't care what their style guide says, I have to keep the serial comma. And
Mhm.
she said, oh, that kind of thing. No, they're going to recognize it's your voice, it's the way you do it, that's going to be fine. But they're going to look for these other things, which she explained. But I remember thinking, wait a minute, punctuation as copywriting, copy editing should not be carved out in its own bucket. Like
Well, and it really,
punctuation
I
is so
mean, the
important.
copy editors work at various levels. I've had copy editors that only do punctuation. I've had copy editors that, thank God, checked all my facts. I've had copy editors that have gotten very invasive, like stylistically invasive. And
Hmm.
I've been, um, in fact, one of them created a typo in No Two Persons. So if you look at in Kit's chapter, Annalise is talking about leap seconds, and it's like 0.001, right? And I originally had it written as the number, and the copy editor insisted on spelling it out. And it's like, um, no, that's not her. But when she spelled it out, when it went to press, they left out one of the zeros, which meant that she actually was factually incorrect.
Oh
And she
no.
never be factually incorrect. So it was, at times, and then another time in Lost Art of Mixing, we had this like down and dirty fight about whether light bulb was two words or one. And weirdly, it mattered a lot because there's the note is by light bulbs, right? Which uh, on the surface is not at all aggressive. In the story, it's very aggressive. But the first time you know about the note, you know it's two words, which would mean, I'm sorry, fuck you, right? If light bulb is two words, then it's a three-word note, which might mean I love you. And it's really important to me that when my readers didn't know what that note was, that it was a two-word note. And this copy editor would not let it go. I mean, it took 2 weeks before we came to a conclusion that was okay. But in that case, it really mattered. I mean, I don't care. I mean, and it's common usage to do it either way. It really didn't matter. But in that case, it's weird fights you have sometimes, get
It
for it. It's gonna be fun.
is. Well, um, I'm going to open up now and let everybody else ask their questions. I was told before we came by some people that they already had questions for you, so I don't want to be accused of hugging the mic the entire time. So everyone, if you could raise your little digital hands, that makes it easiest for me. But otherwise, there you go, Lori. Welcome, welcome. Why don't you start?
Okay. So Erica, it's really nice to see you again, even
Nice to meet
virtually.
you.
So my question, I mean, you already know that I love this book, No Two Persons, and I've read it. I've read it several times, and sometimes I think, oh, I'm just going to read one little chapter now for craft, and that's going to kind of help me. And then I get so much more out of it that it's just a joy every time I read it. So, and I've read most of your other books. I think I've read everything but Scent Keeper. And my question is, this one feels so different. This to me feels like it's a breakthrough book, your breakthrough book, at least so far. And I'm wondering, did you feel that when you were writing it? And do you agree with that assessment? And beyond that, what from your previous books, how did they help you get to this breakthrough book?
Oh, good question. I kind of look at my first three books as a set, even
Mhm.
though Lost Art of Mixing is technically a sequel to School of Essential Ingredients, but they're three books that are kind of a kind. and they're of a certain tone. And it was only after I finished No Two Persons and realized how different it was. And I think Scentkeeper was different, and House Lessons was different. And I don't think it's um, what do you say, a coincidence that um, it was after my parents died.
Mm.
And I wasn't trying to be their little best girl anymore. And I was writing what I cared about and what I was taking bigger risks. Um, and the structure, weirdly, the structure of No Two Persons, you could say it's very similar to School of Essential Ingredients. It's interconnected short stories. But the main difference is School of Essential Ingredients had a cooking class, the same 8 students. They featured in almost every chapter. There was a class every chapter. And so there were these hooks. It was a safe center to the book. No Two Persons was very different. And my agent was very, she was not on board for a long time. She wanted me to put them all in the same book club. And I said, no, not doing it. For so many reasons, I'm not doing that. But I knew it was going to be harder for readers. I knew that some readers were going to be ticked off that it had been called a novel and they saw it as short stories, which is true. There's a solid 10% that are mad about it. And they have every right to be. Um, but to me, I wanted to take that leap. Every time I write a book, I want to learn something new. I want to learn a topic that I didn't know before. I want to go somewhere emotionally I haven't gone before. And I want to do something structurally I've never done before. And so I always said that the School of Essential Ingredients was, oh, I need 2 hands. I broke everything on my left side, which is also why I look a little less made up than usual. But so just imagine my other hand is doing the same thing. Um, so, School of Essential Ingredients was strangers coming together, and Joy for Beginners was friends helping each other out. And Lost Art of Mixing was, I always called it my vertebrae book because it was 4 pairs in conflict. And each time I felt like I was asking a bit more of my readers. Like they had to find more empathy, they had to find more compassion. I wasn't giving it all to them. By the time I got to No Two Persons, you have to search for those connections. You got to really pay attention. I am requiring a lot of my readers. At the same time, I wanted it to be that you could also just read it and never see a connection and still enjoy each of these characters. I read, I was watching a movie at the PT Film Fest. I'm trying to remember who was saying this, but they were saying, why would you ever want to write over someone's head? But more importantly, why would you ever want to write over their heart? And I thought that encapsulates it. I always want to write a book that is, for the Easter egg hunters, man, you've got a hunt to go on. But if you aren't that person, if you just want to ride the wave into the shore, I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, you're just not smart enough for this book. I would never do that. I want to make sure that you can read it on all the levels, because I feel that that is my obligation to the readers, honestly.
Wow, great answer.
They're never short. I'll just warn you. The answers are never short.
I'm going to jump in here though and say about writing to readers on all levels. You're someone who uses a thesaurus every time you have an important word. Have you ever been asked to like dumb down your language or use the easier to get word, even if it's like a shade, you think it's a shade off in meaning? Because that is something that I've like come
Yeah.
across in
Have
my
you
work.
have you encountered that yourself?
Sorry?
Do they try to do that to your writing?
They do try and do it to my writing, and I have just won a victory so far. I can still lose this one, but one of my favorite words is plash. So when water plashes and when water splashes, it's two different things. And every time I put it in 3 books now, and every time some editor has come in and stuck an S in there and said it looks like a typo. And until now, I've written for kids, so maybe kids are too not allowed to learn about Plash yet. But
Mhm.
but finally in this novel, I had my little Plash in there and it came out the other end so far. So but we're not finished, so it might still get locked away from me.
No,
But
I think that's
certainly,
beautiful. I love
I
that word. There's no problem with that word.
Yeah, but so I was wondering about like that kind of generosity of wanting to be be accessible to all readers,
Hmm.
might at some point come up against I used to work in advertising, so I would get clients who'd come in and go, oh, will you write this brochure for me, basically. But bear in mind that the average American adult has a reading age of a 12-year-old or something, and so write to the 12-year-old. And I'm like, well, the average American adult will never read beyond the reading age of 12, and everybody just keeps writing down to that level.
Right.
So,
Right. And I do think
yeah.
there's a difference between a marketing brochure that is aimed at a certain population and a book which you are choosing to pick up. And I'm not trying to sell you anything. I have no problem writing words that people have to look up. I think that's great. I love it when an author makes me look up a word. There was this wonderful moment in one of the films this weekend. It's called "Come See Me in the Good Light," and it's about Andrea Gibson, the poet laureate of Colorado who recently died of cancer. And it's an extraordinary movie. If you can see it, please do. But at one point, and she may have been the person that said that line, actually, that I just mentioned. But at one point, her partner, who is also a poet, is reading her memoir, and she uses the word octopoidal. And Andrea Gibson just goes, "What?" And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I love that word." You know, so and Andrea Gibson is going, "Why do you need to use that word?" And Megan says, "Well, okay, what I probably have to," she said, "What does it?" Andrea goes, "What does it mean?" And Megan goes, "Okay, well, like many armed, it feels like a many. Okay, so I have to bring the word, I have to bring many armed in at some point. So that, and that's the other thing I think is that if you want to use a word like that, then it's only nice to kind of help the reader a little bit. Bring in many armed at some point. It's like if you are going to drop in a French phrase, maybe you want to somehow subtly give people an idea of what it meant in English, right? And I think that's only nice and helpful. Because I think the other is shooting over someone's head or heart. You don't throw those words in just to be fancy, just to make people think you're smart. That's the difference. I think they don't work when it feels like you're just showing off. But when it's a word that's appropriate and it sounds right, I have never gotten a hard time from either a reader or an editor about the vocabulary I use. So I feel lucky that way.
Thank you, Lori. I'm going to now move to Monica because she's been waiting very, very patiently to ask her question. And I think that I know where this is going to go. Monica also writes novels and stories. So,
Great.
You, Ashley, though, it might not go where you think it's going to go because well, I don't know. Anyway, um, maybe it is. I'm really interested in the idea of characters. Each character needs to connect with one other character
Hmm.
in the story, which is something I am doing in the story cycle that I'm writing right now. Um, and so then, but the as you're talking about your writing it, I'm wondering how situation fits in because, I mean, you do a lot of character and part of, you know, developing character has to do with how different people respond to a situation.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm just wondering how you come up with situations, and you talked a little bit about just happening on one. It was uh, instead of an affair or some other situation for these two. It was the
Miranda, yeah.
of art,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I'm just wondering, do they just occur to you because you understand those characters so well and you know where they're going to come together, or is there some other way that you think about situation, especially if you're going through
Hmm.
a long series of stories where the characters interact with each other in different stories in different ways. So it
Well, and
just
yeah,
seems to get
sorry.
complicated.
It's ridiculously complicated. My studio looked like a serial killer map, like the detective who's gone a little crazy with all these lines and everything. I mean, it was just nuts. But what's weird is that each character showed up individually. I did not know how they were going to connect with each other. And I just had to be comfortable sitting back and believing that I would see those. And I have that kind of like I'm really good looking in a refrigerator and seeing a bunch of leftovers and putting them together into something new. I'm very good with forced creativity. And so if you give me 10 characters that have to be connected to each other, my brain will find those connections. So, another character who wasn't connected to anybody particularly was William, who's in the ghost town. And it's like, how am I going to connect this guy with anybody, right? This is crazy. He's in a ghost town. And also, why is he going to read that book? He doesn't read fiction. This is a problem. And so when I figured out that it was going to be Alice's brother Peter's left behind postcard, and I thought, well, that's cool. Okay, he can find the postcard. And I thought it was just going to be this little moment. But then that moment expanded. And this was like at the end of writing this book. And that moment expanded and became the drawing on the other side of the postcard, which became William's reason to start hiking up to the top. And if William hadn't gone to the top of the hill, he wouldn't have had his big revelation. And so it took these two things, William down in the town, William up on the bluff, and pulled them together in a way that gave it so much more meaning. And so that was what was really lovely. And then the other connection with William is that his daughter Clara is the one who writes the modern love essay that Madeline, the agent, reads and helps her decide to choose her own death. And so, and that was another thing where it was like, oh, I could just drop this thing in, but then it actually propels Madeline's story forward. It is part of why she makes the decision that she does. And Clara writes that modern love essay because of what happened with her parents. And so it's this fun way of, I knew I knew I probably had to bring Nola back because I could tell Nola was going to be the heart of the book. And that I've never met anyone who doesn't like Nola. If you ask people who their favorite character is, it'll always be Nola and somebody else, but it's almost always Nola. And so I knew people would want to know because she was younger. How does she like, is she okay? Did she make it out? Um, and I loved putting her in with Madeline, but I loved that the thing that propelled Madeline was a character that she'd never met, wouldn't even ever know. So that was fun.
So there's just a lot of empathy that you do with your characters
Yes. Yeah.
to really get inside of them
Mhm.
before you connect them. Or
Yes.
maybe not before, but maybe as you're connecting them.
Well, I mean,
So
some are
it's really,
logical. I mean, Lara's connection to Alice is obvious. Rowan's connection is obvious. And then it kind of goes out from there, and then Miranda was going to be hard because she never even reads the book. She reads the first line, you know. And I loved that idea of having a character that only read one line and then threw it across the room, which had nothing to do with the book and everything to do with her mother, which is, I think, what the book's all about, right? Is we read things differently because of where we come from.
Mhm. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm going to have to dream a lot, and I can tell that's how
Yeah, just let go and let the connections come. It's just like a spider web happening. It's really,
Yeah.
and have fun with the story cycle. I love those. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm at the end of it, but I am having fun.
mhm.
Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
thank you, Karen, for doing this. This is
Oh,
great.
absolutely. My pleasure.
Thank you, Monica. And Lori, is your hand still up, or you have a new question?
I just have one more little thing.
Okay. Cool.
So my question to you, Erica, is I didn't know until I read the reader's guide and everything at the back that every chapter, I don't know if everybody can see this, but every chapter has got a little sort of graphic organizer that shows the interconnections and how many there are for each character. And I was just kind of gobsmacked by that. And my question was, did you provide that, or did someone else figure out how to artistically render that? Because it's just such a cool. Now I have to go back again and read it because I know I didn't get all the connections.
And I'll warn you that depending on the edition you have, there's a typo in one of the editions where Nola and Kit's charts are exactly the same. So you're
Oh,
not crazy. That's wrong. And
okay.
Madeline's is just so complicated. Don't even try.
Okay.
But if you haven't noticed it before, or if you read the audiobook or read an ebook, I mean, listened to an audiobook or read an ebook, you didn't get those graphics. They're on my website. You can go and you can see them.
Okay.
But they're the cheat sheets. So what it is it starts with the story. So part one starts with a single circle. That's the story. Alice is the second circle that intersects it. And then each chapter introduces the circle of the new character, and the circles that one intersects are the characters that person is connected to. So it's a way to help. But you know what's funny is they almost didn't happen, but my editor came to me and said, we need 12 more pages. Do you have illustrations or something? Or we just need to like hit a number count so that it's easier for printing. This happens sometimes. And I said, don't have illustrations, but I got this idea. And so I just roughly hand drew them, and the art director took them and made them pretty. And he was so on board to do it. It was really
Oh,
fun.
I bet. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And where did the idea of using the schematic come from? Did you?
I mean, I'd kind of been doing that. I do a lot of mind mapping. I do a lot of, connecting. I'm a very visual person in terms of the structure of my books.
Mhm.
I mind map for brainstorming, for research taking, for notes. It's just I had these black notebooks, they're sketchbooks, and they're just packed with those things.
Mhm.
So it's just how I think anyway.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I thought I could do this. And so I just laid him out and he made him pretty.
Then and kind of related is that when you were talking about how your characters like come and they are their own characters and you don't know how they're going to connect, and then all of a sudden this happens and this happens and then that connection is there. Are you writing that character and then as you're connecting them, having to go back and adjust, adjust the schematic all the way around? Or are you someone who like plots it all out first so that when you sit down and write, you're like writing them the way they're going to interconnect?
A lot of the connections came after. So it was a matter of it just sort of added texture in a way because they aren't heavy connections. Even Sailor being Laura's twin and then being Tyler's girlfriend, that was the one that felt most laid in, just sort of like, oh, look, interesting. Those people are connected. Um, but the thing that was even harder actually is that I knew I needed a couple through lines for people. And so Theo, the book, is the through line. And you start at the beginning and you move chronologically through that story. You get a little bit each time in each new chapter. And so, what I had to do was make sure that the chapters lined up so that they could follow him chronologically. So, the part that character was responding to had to be that chronological part. But on top of that, you can't put all the dark characters together. So, if I had put Tyler next to Nola, next to William, y'all would have stopped reading because it would have just been too darn dark. So you need Miranda before Tyler, and you need Kit between Nola and William because Kit's the palate cleanser, right? Annalise and Kit. And Kit's family is nice and rambunctious. And then you get Juliet, the intimacy coordinator, which is a more typical romantic story. You get that between William and Madeline, which are also dark and about death, right? And so you have to make sure that if you're writing these cycles or these interconnected stories, it's like music. You have to make sure that there's that, flow in tone as well, or variation in tone. And so all of these things have to be going on at the same time. And then the beauty of it was when I first went out to do a book event, somebody said, oh, and the arc, you start with a birth and you end with a death, and there's a teenager in the middle. And I went, well, hot damn. I had, well, sometimes they just kind of happen and it's kismet. But, I do think because I kind of lucked out in that the connections could be so tangential that I could kind of lay them in. And if they bloomed into something bigger, that was great. But if they didn't, that was okay too.
Mhm. Okay, well, we have 3 minutes of Erica's time left on the clock. If there are no hands up, I'm going to put Lisa on the hot seat because Lisa said she had a question.
I do, and I feel like it's one of those questions that we can like let's all make tea and sit down and talk about this for the next 3 hours. But I'm so curious about what you've been talking about when you mentioned that you wrote the Alice's chapter later to connect it all together. And so, can you talk a little bit about that process of, you have this collection of stories and then you realize that that you need you need the author's point of view, and yet that chapter we learn so much about the story that then carries through. And for me, I think Shirin mentioned, I picked up, I can't come. I picked up the book and I read that first chapter, and it was one of those chapters where you just kind of sit there and like, okay, I'm going to need to make space for this book. This is not going to be just a quick read. And I haven't finished it yet because I'm like, I don't want to gobble up the book before today. I want to sit with it. But so can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
like which direction you were threading that? So
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating.
Well, and actually, Alice, so the one we were talking about is the last. So Alice is the first and the last. She's the epilogue as well as the first chapter. Um, and so I wrote Tyler first, because I found that book and I just, um, and then I realized I needed the author. And originally she was 65 years old and pretty grumpy. And my agent's like, you know what? We're not going to relate. She's too grumpy. And so I thought, okay. And then I thought, you know what? Well, this thing happened where I was reading Goodreads reviews. I was about to write a review for Friends of Mine book. And I saw this review and it just said, meh. And I thought, bloody hell, you don't get to do that. I'm sorry. She spent years on that book. You do not get to give her three letters of the alphabet. I am sorry. She deserves, you don't have to like it, but you have to give an articulate response for Pete's sake. So, um, that part of that was just this desire to make people remember the person behind the book, that there's a human being that cared about this before it ever touched your hands. And so by making her younger, by making it this such an aspiration for her, by making it such a product of pain, I think that was a way to bring people in. And I loved her once she started showing up. She was a way, I mean, a lot of her early childhood feelings about books and writing were so much mine. I mean, that part was true. And the part about getting rejected was very much me. But the childhood, the brother, the all of that stuff, that is its own thing. So
Fascinating. Thank you. This has been just really very so informative and insightful, and you've been scribbling notes. So thank you so much for it.
thank you. And is that a chart I see on your door behind you? Is that
That's my calendar. My chart is on that
Ah,
wall. And when you're
okay.
talking about visual, it is a wall full of post-its.
I love it. I love it. That's great. That's
I'm going to take all our spotlights off one by one so that well, I don't know about you, but so that I can see us all together, those who have stayed to the end. And I just want everyone to take their mics off and give Erica a big round of applause. Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for the
thank
book,
you
first of
all.
all, and
Thank
thank you
you.
for
It's
joining
been
us to
great.
talk about it.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Hope to see you next month.
Bye.